Hello and welcome once again to Scholars in a Bar. I am your host, Dr. Alan Eichelman, and today we have a fabulous place where we are taping this segment of Scholars in a Bar, where we are on the Mississippi Gulf Coast in the city of Gulfport at a fantastic restaurant and bar known as the Chimneys. This place has a very interesting history, as you are soon going to find out. And also, I want to say that I just had lunch here with two of my colleagues, and it was absolutely superb. So if you happen to be on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, you might want to check out the Chimneys because the food is delicious and the ambiance is fantastic and the view is, well, without compare, because we're sitting right on the Mississippi Sound, looking at the beautiful blue water, and I can see from where I am sitting right now one of the islands off of the coast of the Mississippi Sound. So this is a place that is a must-go-to place if you're ever in Mississippi on the coast. We have with us today the owners, the co-owners of the Chimneys, and I'm going to be introducing them. And before we talk to our scholar of the day, and the co-owners are Sophie Nord and her brother Watson Nord. And I'd like to have you tell us a little bit about the history of this fantastic restaurant.
Well, thank you. It goes back a long way. I would say 45 years or more. So it started long ago. Our grandparents and two other couples started the Cock of the Walk in Natchez. And our parents moved to Long Beach to open up a Cock of the Walk down here. And then they realized that because we're on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, maybe catfish wasn't the thing. Maybe we should do something a little fresher from the Gulf. So then they changed their portion of the restaurant to the Chimneys. So that was about 1983. It was before you? Oh, 1985, okay. So that's when we became the Chimneys. We were in on the north side of Highway 90 in Long Beach. And then
91, we moved to the Long Beach Harbor.
91, we moved to the Long Beach Harbor. And then 99, they purchased the building that was here prior to Katrina, redid it, and we reopened here in 2000. And then the building was destroyed in Katrina. And then we reopened in 2009, my brother and I with our parents. Both of our parents have since passed, but my brother and Watson and I are.
I think we know what we're doing.
We do. Yes, we've tried our best to run the restaurant and do what they would want us to do.
Well, that is fabulous. I remember the old building that was here prior to Katrina, and it was a fabulous old mansion, really is what it was.
It was.
And it had all sorts of different chimneys throughout the mansion, hence the name. And when you rebuilt this restaurant in 2009, which is a marvelous example of the kind of resilient comeback
Thank you.
that we so cherish here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Of course, you put in some beautiful chimney fireplaces that are adorning this place now, and it is absolutely gorgeous. So it has some of the same feel. It's a different building, obviously, because that building,
Couldn't recreate that.
yeah, you couldn't recreate it, and it's gone forever, but what you did was create something which is still marvelous, still fabulous. And I remember when this first opened again, and it was one of those things where people along the Gulf Coast after Katrina, including me, because I was living in Ocean Springs at the time, and my neighborhood didn't look too good, okay? Just put it that way, didn't look too good. And I remember, coming down here as I was heading to our campus, and I said, the Chimneys, it's coming back. Wow. And I know that I was not the only one who felt that way.
Well, thank you. We went back and forth, for a while. But then ultimately, exactly.
And it is. And it's very popular here on the Gulf Coast, and there's good reason for it. Like I said, it is fantastic. I just had your shrimp remoulade salad, and it was outstanding.
Thank you.
And one of my colleagues, I believe, had the crab meat. Chimneys crab meat.
Yes.
And it was very, very cheesy. And
it's like mac and cheese, but with crab meat.
And he still got a happy smile on his face because it was so good. So yeah, the food here is great, and everything about it is just top flight.
Thank you.
And so I personally, even though I now live in, New Orleans, I still work here on the Gulf Coast, and I still consider myself to be a coastian. So as a coastian, I'd like to thank you both.
Oh, thank you.
For doing this.
Well, thank you for choosing us for this fun interview.
Yes, well, you're more than welcome. And we're going to be taking a break here just a second, and then we're going to be bringing our scholar of the day on board. And Watson is going to fix us a house specialty here.
Yes.
Yes, a house specialty, because we are scholars in a bar, so we have to, get the segment going with a toast, with a drink.
Exactly. You need a cocktail.
Yeah. So Sophie, it was great having you.
Thank you.
Be here for us, and like I said, fabulous place. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have with us today Dr. David Holt. David is a professor of geography at the University of Southern Mississippi, but he is also the coordinator of 2 degree programs in sustainability studies and sustainability science. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in just a second, but before we do so, my old friend David here and I are going to enjoy a house specialty drink that Watson is going to prepare for us. Watson, would you please make this is called a fashion, by the way. Not an old fashioned, but a fashion. So it is Watson's take on a traditional drink, but he does it in his own special way. So if you want to have a fashion, one of Watson's fashions, the only place that you can get it is here at the Chimneys. So I would invite you to come here and try that out. So Watson, why don't you prepare that up for us? I'm looking forward to this, David.
Yeah.
I'll like it, I'll drink it.
Yeah, David, I've got to say this. David's an old friend, and we've known each other since David came to the coast back in 2007. I was already here, so he's a kind of post-Katrina guy, and I'm a pre-Katrina guy. And David is married to one of our instructors, Mary Ann Holt, who was an instructor in Spanish, who I knew actually before I knew David. And I had the good fortune of being asked by David and now his bride to join them together in holy matrimony, which is something I did. It was a great day and really wonderful time, wonderful experience. And now David has 2 beautiful little twin girls who are quite handfuls.
They are quite 2 handfuls.
Yes.
I would say 4 handfuls. I think it multiplies. Good.
Yeah, 4 handfuls, that's right.
And see, it worked. So.
Yeah.
So we got the right person to run the weddings.
Yeah. So, yes, David, we've been, this is not the first time, by the way, that David and I have shared a glass of something together. I think over the years we've been in many different establishments sharing many different glasses of this, that, or the other thing.
That's true. I don't think it's a coincidence that academics end up in the public house very often.
We do that quite a bit. And so having scholars in a bar as a program is just a natural for us because that's where we spend a lot of our time.
Indeed.
So that looks very, very interesting. Very interesting, Watson. What are you doing there? What are you putting all together?
Muddled maraschino Luxardo cherry.
Okay.
A little tiny slice of orange.
Uh-huh.
A little bit of simple syrup. Some pastry bitters. Some orange bitters. Some an L&M package store barrel select Old Soul Mississippi bourbon.
And it's Mississippi bourbon, not Kentucky bourbon. A lot of people are under the misconception that bourbon has to be from Kentucky.
It did until a few
But my wife, who is a wine and spirits expert, says that is absolutely not true. Bourbon can be bottled anywhere. It does not have to be bottled in Kentucky.
It's the ratio of corn and the unfiltered.
Yeah, that's what she said. It's the ratio. My wife is a certified wine and spirits master, so I learn all sorts of things
I'm an amateur.
about this sort of thing.
start somewhere.
Yeah.
It's good to have goals. Good to have goals.
There we go. Our napkins. And now to the taste test.
It's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it.
David, to you and your twins, thank you, Watson.
Sláinte. Oh, that's a keeper.
That is a keeper. That is a
Most
keeper.
excellent. You can call it whatever
So
you want.
remember, the next time you're in the Mississippi
nice.
Gulf Coast and you come to the Chimneys, ask for a fashion.
Indeed.
Ask for a fashion. Thank you, Watson. Okay, yes, let's talk a little bit about your work in sustainability studies. What do you do? What is it all about?
Well, I think in a nutshell, there's a big need for it. There's not a lot of research into sustainability. It's one of those things that a lot of people, everybody wants sustainability. They all like it. It's a nice catch term. So let's be sustainable. Let's make sure that what we're doing now can perpetuate in the future. But there's not a lot of people that are actually looking into what does that mean? How does that manifest itself? And there's so many different ways that it can manifest itself. And our program in sustainability is trying to pull from every discipline necessary to look at this. It's just a really broad field.
And the list of disciplines is somewhat awesome when you get down to it. Why don't you just run through some of the disciplines?
Well, as an example, we've got biological sciences, we've got geography, we have chemistry and physics, we have history, we have literature, we even have our film programs is written into it. So we cover from the humanities and what's traditionally known as the social sciences and the hard sciences, because everything's interconnected. You can't take one thing without the other. And if you focus only on one aspect of sustainability, you miss the bigger picture, quite simply.
And in fact, I just proposed a course for the program that hasn't been approved yet, but the course is on religion and resilience.
Sure.
Because anybody who understands what happened here post-Katrina understands, well, just one aspect of religion and resilience is the millions of volunteers and tens to millions to hundreds of millions of volunteer hours that were contributed by religious organizations that helped with the rebuilding of not only the Gulf Coast, but also of New Orleans.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that drives us in with the concept of sustainability or resilience, I actually think resilience is a more popular term for sustainability, because sustainability kind of gives you this impression that you can return to status quo. And looking at religion on the side, the response, what we call the faith-based response of faith-based organization, it was astonishing, to be quite frank. People coming down just wanting to help in any way that they could. Mississippi was hit by Hurricane Katrina, and pretty much the waterfront was removed, functionally removed. The storm surge in some areas we measured to 36 feet, I think it is, 32 feet, maybe it's 32 feet. Our geography department came out and actually measured the line, which is way higher than a Cat 5 is supposed to do. And Hurricane Katrina wasn't even a Cat 5. She was a Cat 5 earlier, but she came on shore as a Cat 3. New Orleans technically was only hit by a Cat 1, and so we saw what the damage is. So a lot of people look at hurricanes as only the biggest, baddest hurricanes cause problems. Katrina did, but we've had smaller hurricanes that were Cat 1s that did significant damage. But going back to the idea about what's recovery, is we drive up and down the coast and we don't see the old houses. The house that they were described that used to be here, this very restaurant that came back after Katrina, was rebuilt. And most of the coast is being rebuilt. But one of the things that still marks the Mississippi Gulf Coast is lots and lots of open parcels that have yet to be rebuilt. They're just slabs. We even have some nonprofit organization, the Steps, which I've worked with, Steps Coalition, which is named after all the steps that were left behind. The only thing left of the house was the concrete front steps that existed there. We pose this question all the time to our students: what is recovery? When do you say we recovered from Katrina? And we're learning that that's not an answer. It's not when do we recover from Hurricane Katrina. It's like when do we function again? When are we out of the phase of trying to mitigate the damage? So how do we get back to a life that's livable? And so the whole idea about resilience and coastal resilience is how can we maintain a life that is livable along the coast when we know that we have these hazards that exist.
And maybe some of those steps are a good thing. And what I'm saying is because they serve as a reminder. Because as we were talking about previously, people tend to forget, and it's something they should not forget. And I'm thinking about our own campus, where in the middle of the campus, we have what is left of the foundation of what used to be our administration building. Mm-hmm. And all that's there is the foundation. Yeah. The rest of it's gone, but it serves as a constant reminder of what can happen and that you've got to be prepared for.
Yeah, so when I came here in 2007, I came to a campus that was displaced. We were moved to half of a building in Gulfport, and we were teaching most of our classes out of trailers. So you want to talk about resiliency, is to getting students finished with their education and graduating them nonetheless. So our campus itself was overwashed, and the administration building was a wooden building that couldn't be recovered, and ultimately was destroyed. So in a way that we still bear those scars, if you will, and they're good reminders, because I think one of the biggest problems we have with resiliency, or even the idea of how do we come back from a hurricane, is you get what's called Katrina fatigue. We named it, where people don't want to write papers about Katrina anymore. They don't want to talk about Katrina anymore. And the rest of the country has moved on, but you can't move on when you're literally looking at the very water that, overran the campus or the properties. And so you end up with this disconnect, and people slowly but surely forget about the disaster that was there. And we see signatures of people asking, like, why are there still properties here? How come they're not selling them? And why aren't people building there? And so we try to look at recovery in any way that we can. And so is it population? Is it tax base? What is it? Is it just because faith-based groups came in and cleaned up the area and put on a new roof? Is that now recovered? We can go home? But the reality, that's not the case. And
I think you mentioned that 15 years is about the point where you end into kind of a collective amnesia relative to what happened. And we're sitting here now at 18 years. And that's probably not a good thing, because it means that you let your guard down in some way, shape, or form. And
right, or you come across as a curmudgeon. As an academic, you're like, don't forget Katrina. And they're like, no.
At my age, it's easy enough to come across as a curmudgeon as it is. So I don't.
It's an academic.
Certainly don't want to do that. Or
occupational. It's an occupational hazard.
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard. Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, so we have to keep working at the issue, which is resilience, and much more so than sustainability, because. When you stop to think about it, nothing can be sustained.
No.
My wife and I were in Rome a couple of years ago, and Rome is very instructive this way. The remnants of the Colosseum are there. They're not doing gladiatorial combats in it anymore. It's not a functioning arena in any way, shape, or form. It's some stones piled on top of one another. And that didn't even take a hurricane. All it took was time.
Right.
All it took was time. Everything with time that is bound by time
can't be
has its
sustainable.
day. You cannot be sustainable.
Well,
But it can
I
be-
would go even further than that to say you can't have anything that's sustainable if you are dependent upon a finite resource, whatever that resource is. We can point out at petroleum. So yeah, no matter how much petroleum you think there is, we will eventually run out. So if we're going to imagine a perpetual Earth that goes on forever, we're eventually going to run out of these resources. So really, resiliency is the key. Is how do you switch that? And in Rome, as if you want to use Rome as an example. A lot of times they just build on top of it, or all the walls fell down but one, so they build I think there's a bank built around one that's like really,
Yeah, it's fascinating. 'Cause when
second
you're in Rome-
century wall of this
It's
modern.
fascinating because there are many places where you can go down into the ground and see what the original foundation was. You go 60, 70 feet down,
Yeah.
and you realize this was basically ground zero at one time for Rome, and now everything has been built upon it. All the new has been built upon it.
Yeah, but on the coast, building upon it is now the base elevation flood model. So we have to
Yeah,
put
it's a
everybody
base
way up in the
elevation
air.
flood model, exactly. Yeah. What
I
is-
always joke, like, you want to find if you're in a flood zone. It's like, well, first find out if you can get flood insurance. And if they say yes, probably not. But two, see how high their building is. How many steps do you need to get to the front door?
Well, that's solved now by elevators,
Yeah.
because it used to be that a lot of the higher structures only had walk-ups.
Yeah.
Now you can tell how much higher they are because they almost all have elevators.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So, and we still have a lot of them going up. If you go up and down the Mississippi Gulf Coast right now, I was just coming through past Christiane, and I looked over to the left and I thought, I was only here maybe a few weeks ago. When did that building go up? But it is up. It is up considerably from where it would have been
Absolutely.
prior to Katrina.
Well, there's sort of a signature along the coast for that recovery. And you can see the places that rebuilt immediately, or some of them were still on grade because they were able to grandfather it in and start the rebuilding process. It wasn't until we come up with FEMA about how high you have to, and that got adjusted. So you can even map out, this is just to be an uber geography nerd, the height of the house is usually indicative for when it was rebuilt. So you can actually, it shifts up and down with what the rules were at the time. And interestingly enough, very few people overshot those rules about how high does a building need to be. So there's just, weird signatures that fall out there.
Well,
but it's all
our
just,
house was in Ocean Springs at the time, was at a base flood elevation of 15 feet, based on how it was built up on pillars. And
that was pre-Katrina?
That was pre-Katrina. And unfortunately, and it was grandfathered because actually some of that house, the main structure of the house actually held, even though the flood was 22 feet at that particular spot. Because of the way the house was built, it was almost like everything just flowed naturally through it. And so the basic structure was there. But in the main living level, we had 7-8 feet of water on top of that 15-foot base elevation. So that gives you some idea. And of course, the house still sits at the same elevation because it was grandfathered, because it was already there and the structure itself was held.
but it doesn't change the threat. And that's,
No, it doesn't. And
that's the reality of living along the coast.
That's the threat. And of the 29 houses where we were, there was only 5 of us had anything left we could rebuild. So 22 of the houses, I think, were completely washed away. And 5 of our neighbors were killed because they were living under, and this is something else you might want to talk about, what I call the Hurricane Camille delusion. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the Hurricane Camille delusion.
Well, delusion seems a little bit of a heavy word in my opinion, but when we talk about recovery, we talk about recovery from Hurricane Katrina. The rule of thumb was what happened in Camille. It's like my house didn't get damaged in Camille, so we're going to stay. So now that has changed to my house didn't get damaged in Katrina, so now I'm going to stay. And so that becomes the litmus test of am I safe or am I not safe? But the reality of that is every storm is unique unto itself. And this whole idea about Camille, and Camille was Camille was actually recovery pre-big insurance. So there's some people who argue that that's made a big difference on what recovery really looks like. Is Camille, most people had to rebuild their own houses. You know, we've got stories of people who live down here. I've got family members who literally scavenged wood around post Camille and helped rebuild their old house that of course got wiped out by Katrina later on. But it's one of those, at what stage are you safe? And that's really what it comes down to. And unfortunately, we had a lot of loss of life because people were like, well, we're not going to leave because
That was
X, Y, and
certainly
Z.
the case in my neighborhood.
Yeah. You know, so yeah, some people try to say, well, it's cost and, you know, it's transportation and it's the road network. But really getting back to the concept of like why we try to study sustainability is like if you don't look at those questions, you'll never have an answer. One of the first things that I worked on when I got down here, and I came in 2007, I was one of the strange people who moved here right after, is that everybody wanted to do a pre and post. It seemed like the most natural things. Like, let's look at what it looked like before Katrina, and let's look at after Katrina. And using geographic information systems, we can map it all out. None of those data existed. Every county was, and even some cities were their own network of trying to figure out. I know people that work in the industry literally burning CDs, you know, put it into data ourselves a little bit, burning the data on a CD and driving it to another municipality like, here's what we have as far as the road network. We have that, we'll drive it to you. Couldn't use the internet, too big, literally driving it and handing off the data. And so everybody who wants to do a pre and post Katrina study can't do it because we don't have any data. So one of the big projects that I worked on first was land use, land cover for the entire 3 counties. And thanks with the help of the Maris and several other organizations like the Mississippi Association for Spatial Technology, we've really started to standardize the entire state. And I thought that was just crazy. But then I started working with FEMA at the emergency center down in Biloxi. And they're all looking at like, well, what did you guys do for Andrew when it hit Florida? And they're like, oh yeah, we did all the studies. We've got it all in there. We put it all in nice, neat little federal boxes, and they all went to federal warehouse. I'm like, well, can you look at the data? Can you see what how did you respond? It's like, no, it's all been filed away. And so Katrina ended up being this big,
It reminds me
let's
of,
not do that problem
Yeah,
again.
you know what that reminds me
all
of?
of this data they had is just, it's like if you watch the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
There is how we solved the problem
gee.
before. And so we're like, let's not do this again. But one of the big problems we found with Katrina research is that it's very linear. You pass information up the chain, but it doesn't come back down the chain. So the city passes it to the county passes it to the state passes it to the federal government, and then you can't get it to come back the other direction. So there's been a huge fight for that. And so a lot of the recovery now that you see, if you want to really see how resilience and studying resilience pays off, is now, if you want to know if you're in danger for a hurricane, you don't look for Jim Cantori showing up. So you look to see if the utility vehicles are driving down the road.
For those of you who are not aware
All
of
due
what the
respect to
Jim
Jim
Cantori
Cantori.
is about, if you live in a danger area in anywhere where there is a serious hurricane threat, the standing joke is the last person you want to see show up on your doorstep is Jim Cantori with the Weather Channel.
With the Weather
because
Channel, he's
Jim
a hazard
Cantori will be at ground zero of whatever disaster is going to
we
happen.
flying him into Gulfport.
So if you see Jim Cantori, get out of Dodge quickly.
Yeah. But the reality is, Jim Cantori, sure, that's a problem. But you start seeing the utility vehicles snaking in out of state.
Oh yeah.
Lining up, 20 miles in. You're like, oh, we're in the target zone now. It's getting real. That's when it's getting real. Is when you start seeing those guys, and when they start driving out, that's how you know it's over. And so that all comes from Katrina research.
Yeah, because when you do the evacuation, as you're driving out, you're watching them drive in.
They're coming in to fix everything because we, post-Katrina, the Emergency Response Center was set up in Jackson, Mississippi. So Jackson was hit by a Category 1 storm, but all of the roads were gone. You're having to do latitude and longitude. Literally, the GIS people are, so-and-so is trapped in a school, and they're like, we don't know where it is. The rescuers don't know where it is. There's no street signs. The roads are blown out. And so literally flying helicopters, Coast Guard helicopters to a latitude and longitude, slowing down and looking for the school that they're in. We don't want that to happen again. We want to make sure that food's there. We want to make sure water's there. We want to make sure all the communities that are in danger have a response.
And you know, the thing is, when it comes to this sort of thing, we've been focusing here on Mississippi and a little bit on New Orleans, but it is every single coastal town from Brownsville all the way up to probably Portland, Maine, is in this kind of danger zone. And all of the intervening islands, like in the Florida Keys, and all of the inlets and bays and everything else. And so to think that this is something that is only going to hit Mississippi or only going to hit New Orleans, you're making a big calculation error at that point. As I tell my relatives, and they don't like hearing it, in Tampa Bay, it's not a matter of if this is going to happen.
Yeah.
It's a matter of when it is going to happen, and that is undetermined, but it will happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, the landfall of a hurricane, you can look at when you get a major hurricane. For this area, it's about every 50 years, just statistically speaking, but you can have two in the same season. Look at Lake Charles. You know, Lake Charles had, they had several major hurricanes hit them in a row. And if that was to shift, those same hurricanes, if they would have shifted to Houston and all those hit Houston in a row, you know, the economy of the United States would be different.
And that's the thing. We're talking about the economy of the entire country.
Right.
And a lot of people think, well, New Orleans is just, all they do is play there. No, they don't just play there. It is one of the major port cities in the entire world.
Which is a two-way street, yeah.
Yeah, and it
Stuff goes in
drains
and out.
and the Mississippi drains 33 states and provinces collectively, which means that you've got traffic, not only traffic coming into the port from out in the ocean, but you've also got traffic coming down the Mississippi from those 33 states and provinces.
A lot of agriculture.
Which means that you've got a major economic impact if the Mississippi, the New Orleans port system, which runs from the mouth of the river to Baton Rouge, if that is taken out, the economic impact is huge. If Houston is taken out, the economic impact on the entire nation is huge. Tampa Bay would be another one. Huge impact. One right after another. And we've got to be cognizant of this, prepared. We've got to, and resilience means how fast can you bounce back from all of this.
Yeah, I don't see, you're not going to get people to leave Tampa. You're not going to get people to leave New Orleans. You're not going to go like, oh, it's dangerous, I got to go. You know, I still think one of the big, you know, like on the checklist of like super bad things that could happen would be a major storm to New York City. But you're not going to get people to leave New York City. So what you do in a study of resilience, or you look at what can we do, or make people aware what the situation is, so that you can make your own individual choices. You can stay in a hurricane or you can leave in a hurricane. Which ones do you choose? How do you do that? But I think that's where it comes back to this whole multidisciplinary idea of studying it, is like I can do that in a GIS as a geographer, or we can look at, you know, mangroves as the biologist can get out there, or we can get the marine biologist, or we can get, you know, anybody out there doing that. But we can also get people who are looking at the cultural framework or the religious aspect of it, or how we respond to these sorts of things. And that's how we go from, it's just not a physical environment problem. It very rapidly becomes a human and cultural problem. And if you're not prepared to adjust to those things, if you're not prepared or to think about those things before that happen, even if it's in a bar, we want to try to make sure that we have answers, and we have, like, what do we do? We have a storm coming in, what do we do? Well, we now, thanks to Katrina, we now have, okay, station water, station food, get the utility people already here so they don't have to drive through it, station them, you know, that sort of thing. We have all of these plans. We've got, like, you know, literally huge acreage of just trailers waiting to go.
And like New York, you say, where are you going to relocate New York?
You can't get everybody out of the buildings. People don't realize that.
And Manhattan, you know, they talk about New Orleans is sinking. Well, guess what? So is Manhattan. Yeah. So if you're talking about, you know, climate change too, then on top of it, and you've got a couple of cities that are definitely significant and definitely sinking, what do you do about that? How do you maintain resilience against those issues?
Right. Well, you're not going to get rid of hazards. That's what the other thing is. Like, you know, people argue, like, am I going to, you know, why would you live in a place where a hurricane would hit? They're like, well, first off, I get to look at the sound every day. That's kind of nice. We like to live next to water. Humans like to live next to water. But there's so many other hazards. Like, why do people live in California? You have earthquakes. We also have blizzards, we've got all sorts of hazards that are out there. If anything, my defense for a hurricane is like, well, we usually get a bit of a warning for a hurricane. So it comes back down to, how do you immediately respond to that hazard? Yeah. We can have a tornado come through. How do we immediately respond
Exactly.
to that
There's
hazard?
more than one hazard. There's a multiplicity of hazards that are out there that are very, very serious. And just about everybody is probably in line to be affected by one of them or another.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, David. And we're going to do a little cutting here for a second. We might be able to get back. I'm not quite sure, but I'm getting some signals that we're having a little bit of problem with
The angels
basically
are shining on your face, I
sunspots.
think.
Talking about natural disasters, we're getting a natural phenomena right now with the sun coming down on us and messing up our camera angles. So we're going to take a little break. Thank you.
All right.
Well, we're back with you. And the thing is, what just happened was an example of exactly what we were talking about. As Dr. Holt put it, nature always wins.
Nature always wins.
So the sun was right upon me, destroying any film angles that we had. And our film crew was immediately able to reset everything and get us going again, which is also an example of resilience. In other words, if you're going to let nature completely control things, well, nature is going to have its way, and there's not much you can do about that. But at the same time, there are things that you can do to more rapidly bounce back. And that's what we're talking about, is rapid response. Bouncing back as fast as you can. It has to do with all sorts of things like, first responders and where you have them placed. It has to do with the kind of building materials you use and how fast you can replenish those materials, and making sure that you have adequate supplies of those materials on hand before the disaster occurs. When you do all of that, you can bounce back much faster. One of the things that religious organizations have understood now, but in a way that they didn't previously, is we have to have disaster teams in place and that are trained, because it's not just a matter of throwing some stuff in the trunk of your car and running down to Mississippi or wherever the disaster is.
That's actually been a problem.
But that's actually a problem. You're contributing to the problem when you do that. You got to know what you're doing. You got to know how to approach the situation before you get there. Right. So it's about keeping yourself knowledgeable about all of these things. And that is exactly why what we're talking about, and what Dr. Holt is talking about with the School of Coastal Resilience, why this is so important, not only for our universities, but for other universities to become aware of and understand as well. And with that, I'm going to turn back to my good friend, Dr. Holt, and say, why don't you expound upon some of that?
Well, to believe it or not, it was actually some of the response by groups with the purest of hearts, literally the purest of hearts, are actually in some cases causing more problems than good if you don't understand what you're doing. I would probably fall back to the droughts in Ethiopia in the 80s, probably is the greatest example. A huge drought hit. Everybody in the world responded very, very quickly. There was Live Aid Africa. Remember those concerts and everything they put on? Yeah. And so people just sent food like crazy, food and clothes and everything that you could possibly need. Arguably, in hindsight, more than enough to feed everybody in the entire country that was affected by this particular drought. But what happened is it just all went to warehouses.
Because there's no distribution
system. There's no infrastructure. There's no distribution. No. There's no how do we get it to the people who need it. It was just send it, and it ended up becoming more of a problem. And I don't know the stats on it, but I would argue that just as much food went bad that was consumed in that particular issue because it wasn't thought out. That's what our job is. That's what our job is just to think it out. Is try to look at how do we think of the problem? Maybe this goes back to the very early comments we had that we come across as curmudgeons all the time, or like the skeptics all this time, is because we're trying to defeat the problem before it happens. So we have to think of the problem that could come up. Wait, and that's why we always go like, wait, what about this? It's like, well, have you thought about this? What about this? And we're not doing that to be annoying. We're doing that to go like, let's let's make sure that we've got all our ducks in a row. It's like, all right, let's solve this problem. I think it would be a fantastic
Which is great.
exercise for like religious organizations to have, okay, if there's an earthquake, this is how we should respond to it. If there is a hurricane, this is how we should respond to it, as opposed to, let's throw everything we got in the car and let's go.
Well, one of the things that denominational disaster response teams have done is they're doing exactly that. They're
Good.
starting to take a look at, okay, when this happens, how do we plan for it? Not just going down there, but where, like you said, a bunch of volunteers. Well, where are they going to live? Because they're walking into the disaster itself. Are they going to get in the way, or are they going to be able to do what they're sent to do?
They're typically in an area they're unfamiliar with.
Only if in a territory they're not familiar with. Only if they have, we've trained them, and B, we've set up reception centers. And in those reception centers, we've accounted for the need for their living arrangements. B, we've set up distribution centers. So we know that we can get things distributed to people because there's going to be tons of stuff coming down. And yeah, they're thinking of these things now, and much more so than in the past. It's absolutely critical. They're working with other organizations, like they're working with FEMA and Red Cross to coordinate efforts. But yeah, if you just send things, that doesn't do a lot of good if there's no distribution network, if the infrastructure isn't set for the people who need it to receive it.
Yeah, I think that, not to sound crude, but that just makes people feel better about themselves. Like, well, I did this, so yay me.
They
And
feel
then
like they've done something.
They're done.
Yeah, they feel like they've done something.
And I would argue that goes back to the whole Katrina fatigue syndrome, if you will. It's like why that occurs with humanity, why people culturally behave that way is slowly but surely they move on to other things.
Well, I'll tell you the folks that helped us the most, and not that I want to compliment you, David, because I know you so well.
There's no.
You see what I mean? See how he's responding? Just, you know. But the thing
I already
is,
know. I already know.
the thing is that what helped us probably the most post-Katrina were people who came down here and stayed.
Yeah.
Like yourself and like so many who said, the problem is ongoing. This needs to be addressed. So I'm going to stay here to address it.
Right.
Even in the midst of the recovery, not when everything is perfect and beautiful in the way as I would like it to have it be, but in the midst of the recovery. And that happened here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast with folks as yourself. It happened in New Orleans.
Right.
There were people who said, and I remember I was in a particular area of New Orleans that was, they call the sliver by the river, which means it's on high ground, which means it wasn't terribly affected by Katrina. But we had our urban getaway place over there. And so it was a respite from having to deal with everything that was happening over here in Mississippi. And I remember walking around the block, and as I walked around the block, I encountered all of these new people. And I said, where are you from? And they said, well, we're from New York, or we're from Illinois, or we're from Ohio. And we came down here to help, and we really like it here, and we decided to stay. Mm-hmm. And I remember as I walked around the block, and I came back to the condo where our urban getaway was, and I said to my wife, Margene, Margene, we're going to be okay. We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
I said, all of these young people, these new people are coming in, they're bringing tons of energy, they're committed to being here, everything is going to come back. It's not going to be as it was before. There's going to be a lot of stuff that is, we have a popular songster in New Orleans called Benny Grunch, and he sings a song called Ain't There No More.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of Ain't There No More, but at the same time, there's going to be all sorts of wonderful new things happening.
But isn't that the heart of studying sustainability and resilience, is getting everybody to the point that they're like, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, that's it.
You know, accepting we're going to be different, but we're going to be fine. And that's really what that's what people want. I think it's what people really shoot for. Isn't that what everybody shoots for? Like, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, we're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And here we are. We are fine. I mean, as we said earlier, we are here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast in this beautiful restaurant overlooking the beautiful Mississippi Sound, enjoying a fantastic
Fashion
drink. And
Go fashion.
it's wonderful. So all I can say is always look to the positive and look to the future. The future can be hopeful, but if it's going to be hopeful, it's going to depend on you.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, thank you for tuning in once again to this segment of Scholars in a Bar.
Sláinte.